Coming up, a historic first round of the 2025 NBA draft is in the book for the Nets. I'll break down Brooklyn's shocking night after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'll be reacting to a historic draft during which the Nets made an NBA record 5 first-round picks, including a fairly shocking selection with their first choice at 8th overall. I'm joined now by Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. And Lucas, we're fresh off the first round of the NBA draft. It's about 2:16 in the morning. The Brooklyn Nets made 5 first-round picks, an NBA record, a lot of surprises. A lot of fans seem like they're losing their minds. Initial reaction just to this Nets draft off the cuff. Just what do you got for me?
No matter where you fall on the draft, it was certainly an unbelievable draft in that I could not really believe it as it was happening. They were linked to Egor Demin. And if you've been a Nets fan for long enough, it was not, I guess, totally surprising that they took him. But then going Traore on top of it, who I think is objectively a fine pick at 19. I think it's understandable to see how, you might be high on a guy like that at 19. If we did this draft 10 months ago, he would have gone top 10. But with Egor, it's a little odd. And then you go Saraf, which is where I think our brains started to break fully if they weren't already broken. You sit back and reflect, and it's really just an unbelievable night to kickstart, maybe not to kickstart this rebuild, but to lay the real first foundational pieces, I would say.
Yeah, my brain started to break when they picked Saraf and they made their 4th first-round pick.
Fair enough.
I was like, holy crap, they made 4 first-round picks. And then I was like, holy crap, they have a 5th first-round pick right now that they're also going to make. When they acquired, they already had 4. Nobody thought that they were actually going to make 4 first-round picks. And they acquired the 5th in the salary dump with the Hawks yesterday. And at that point, you're like, all right, like, Sean
trade
Martin
up,
gearing up, to trade up either further into the top 10, which I know that they tried to do. I reported earlier today that they inquired with the Spurs, the 76ers, the Hornets. They were talking to all those teams about potential moves up. None of that came to fruition. You thought maybe they can move up in the late lottery. They don't do anything. They don't trade out of any of the picks. They stick there and they pick with all of them. So that was the first major surprise. The next major surprise, I think, would be them taking Egor Demin with the 8th pick, which drew a strong reaction from the fan base. I think you and I both have similar opinions on it. So when you heard those words come out of Adam Silver's mouth, what was the first thing that you thought?
I thought, wow, they really did it. They really did it. You knew they liked Egor. I think based on, you could trust enough of the pre-draft reporting. The Nets have typically kept things close to the vest, but when you hear something consistently from trusted sources, you think, okay, this has some merit. I think they liked Fears. I believe that still. So Ace is off the board, Trey's off the board, Jeremiah's off the board. At this point, you're thinking, okay, if you weren't big on those guys, I personally wasn't. I was like, okay, Malawach, Songa. But it's just, it's hard to make the case for him as a top 10 prospect profile just based on what he did at BYU and even his, professional career prior to that. As we get further away from the draft, you can see I'm at a loss for words. As we get further away from the draft, we'll maybe be able to assume more of what they thought going into this. But it's a shocking pick. I mean, it could work out. I'm not an expert. You know, even experts in the draft get things wrong all the time. But I think the one thing that is clear, it is a shocking pick to draft Egor Demin with that profile at number 8. It's really shocking.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the projections, and these aren't guys who work in front offices, but they're guys who've been doing it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They follow the draft. A lot of people had Demin. I think most consistently, you'd say he was probably in the late lottery, mid-teens, but there were some guys who had him, like in the mid-20s of big boards.
Yeah.
A lot of people had him as a target for the Nets at 19.
Yeah.
And they end up picking him at 8. And I think it shocks everybody. While as you said, there were ties to him, and I knew that the Nets liked him. I didn't really think that they would pull the trigger there, because I thought potentially they could maybe try to trade up and get him in the late lottery. But let's get into him just like as a player a little bit to set the stage, because while some people are crushing this pick, analysts and fans alike, I said to you while we were at Barclays, like you don't have to squint too hard to see the vision of what they could be looking at. Like, this is a guy who was viewed as a top prospect, top 10 pick. Maybe some people even said potentially like top 5, 6, 7 entering the college season. He's a 6'8" ball handler, 6'10" wingspan, best passer in the draft. He has some athletic limitations, but it really seems like a lot of what he does is going to hinge on the 3-point shot and whether he can develop that. Draft people I've talked to have said that is the swing skill for him, because even though he is not great, athletically, he's not great at creating separation from defenders in isolation. He can't really get downhill on his own too well. But if he's just his pick and roll ball handling and his pick and roll facilitating, if he can shoot the 3 consistently and unlock that and, let his playmaking gift shine, you have a 6'8" ball handler who's an elite passer with elite vision. And if he can shoot, it seems like he can unlock all of that. So there's something, they're betting on upside here. So I don't have to squint too hard to see that, but it does seem like there's some bust potential with this pick, which is what makes it an interesting pick at 8, especially when there was a guy sitting there, Kaman Malawach, who I think most would agree was an extremely safe pick.
Yeah, or Colin Murray-Boyles is a fairly safe pick just as an extremely projectable defender and high field guy. The Nets went, I mean, we'll talk about their draft as a whole, but the Nets went high field, what they perceive as, high field here. That's pretty undeniable. And if you are a highlight scouter, if you're a fan who, looks up these guys' best plays of the year, Egor is the number 8 pick, and it's fun. Like, you see a 6'9" guy, 6'8" and a quarter without shoes, who throws some ridiculous passes, who hits deep pull-up threes. Like, to be clear, he shot 27% from 3 this year, but he took like 9 attempts per 100 possessions. So you can find any number of clips of him walking into 25-footers, and he looks like an NBA player in those moments. And I think we can say that all the noise about him having great workouts and great interviews played into the Nets taking him here. I heard, as you probably did too, he just would not have been there at 19. So I don't think the Nets were the only team that liked him in, let's say, the back half of the lottery range. But you kind of, this is going to sound very mean, you kind of have to ignore the season that he had at BYU in terms of the production. I wrote about this for Nets Daily. In 27 games against top 150 NCAA teams, which was sort of every game after a very soft non-conference schedule for BYU, he had 67 made baskets and 58 turnovers. He grabbed 3 offensive rebounds in 20 conference games. There were plenty of times for a lot of the season, honestly, in which he just did not look like an NBA athlete, much less a Big 12 athlete. And that is, I'm rooting for him. Obviously, he's a cool kid to talk to. I think you and I both learned that tonight. It's tough to see a guy who struggles that much against good NCAA competition, and not just because the 3 ball didn't go in, as a number 8 pick. I agree with you. The 3 ball is going to be a big swing skill. That is not my even main concern with him. I don't know if you'd feel that strongly. It's a concern for sure, but that's not it. You know, that's not the
Yeah.
only thing his NBA career hinges on. I'm not saying you implied that, but just
No,
to
no,
be
I,
clear.
I understand what you're saying, and I mean, I'm trying to see the vision for the Nets here, and if I'm talking myself into the pick, if I'm the Nets, and what are you betting on? I think you have a guy, as I said, who has incredible size
Yep.
as a ball handler. You have a guy who's extremely high feel. He's extremely unselfish. He can pass the ball at a really high level in the pick and roll. And, if he can shoot threes and he can do some of
Mhm.
those things, maybe, the self creation, the ball handling, the, lack of burst and downhill stuff, maybe that stuff isn't as glaring. And, then defensively, they seem to think that he's not going to be, a negative defensively. And they think that with his
Right.
size, if he can grow into that body, he has some upside there. So at the end of the day, like the way that I think I would look at it for them is they seem to think that I would think they think his 3-point shot's going to come along. If it,
Yes.
that seems like it has to. Otherwise, this pick is just, I think, going to seem terrible if that doesn't come along, because then that limits what he can do positionally in other spots as
Right.
well.
You can't
But
play him. You can't play him off the ball in that case.
exactly, yeah,
I totally agree with your sell though.
yeah.
Tall
So
guys. You can never have too many high level passers and ball handlers and shooters. You just can't.
yeah,
So
I
I get it
mean,
from that perspective.
so yeah, if they're not assuming, but if they're very hopeful that the 3-point shot can come around, apparently he shot it really well in workouts.
Yep.
However much stock you put into uncontested, workout or pro day jumpers, but if they think the shot can come around, and they think that he can be a decent defender based on what Sean Marks told us today,
Mhm.
you have a guy who's 6'8", if he can shoot, he's a gifted passer. He can handle in the pick and roll. Maybe they believe there's some ways that they can unlock the self-creation aspect of his game. Like there are tools there. And that's what Sean said. I asked him about
Yeah.
what attracted to them. He said there's a lot of attributes there, and he named a lot of that stuff. So I think that's what they're talking themselves into. But there's another side of this where there are concerns, and some aspects of the concerns and the lack of a floor is what surprised me about the pick. We'll get into that after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at WayFair. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, WayFair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours. Comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Guys, are you looking to redesign your patio this summer? Maybe your style leans more towards clean and modern. You'll love being able to filter and find exactly what fits your space and budget. The delivery is free, fast, and totally hassle-free, even with larger items. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. All right, coming back from the break, talking with Lucas Kaplan after pretty much just a stunning first round of the draft for the Brooklyn Nets. And we're talking about Egor Demin, who the Nets took at 8. It's their first lottery pick since 2010, when they took Derek Favors third overall, and then they traded Derek Favors like 30 games into his career. But yeah, Egor Demin, we talked about the upside. Like I talked about, this is an upside swing, I feel like, for the Nets. If the 3-point shot can come around, I outlined, how I feel like they think he could be a jumbo playmaking guard who can do all of these things, might not be, could be a decent defender, like all that versatility, all of those different ways that they could look to unlock his game. What surprises me about it is that this is not at all a safe pick, I feel like. This is an upside swing, but this is the first lottery pick the Nets have made since 2010. And look, a lot of the fans, fans seem outraged by this pick. A lot of them. Maybe I'm not seeing like the scope of the whole fan base, but a lot of them seem really mad. And to the ones who seem like outraged about it, I'm like, hey, maybe you guys don't know what you really want, because all I heard about throughout the draft was the pre-draft process was upside, upside, upside. Like, we got to go for upside. They went for upside. Maybe some people don't agree with that. I feel like this is an upside swing. And sometimes, what I said throughout it was, with everybody's obsession with upside, is sometimes when you go for upside so much, the floor can fall out from underneath you. And I feel like there's some potential for that with this Demin pick. So do you agree with my assessment that this is an upside swing and that there does seem to be a fair amount of bust potential here?
It is an interesting question because with Ace Bailey, who the Nets were linked to, I probably would have said I would have disagreed with that premise because I didn't think he could maybe create space and therefore read the whole floor to the degree you would want a high level, offensive engine to be. And Egor has, it's obviously a way different prospect, but, potentially similar downfall. He can't really create space or get by people. However, the 3-point shot comes along. He's hitting pull-ups. He's forcing people to guard him up the floor. I agree that there's serious bust potential. I don't always think that means necessarily he also has a high upside, but I could certainly talk myself into that, that sort of disposition on Egor, just as a tall a guy who can handle the ball, who can be off the ball, who will keep your offense moving, who will, just always make the players around him better. That is the sell. And if a guy can do that, then he has a pretty high ceiling. And of course, it can't go unstated. The Nets love Egor, the kid, the person, the worker. You've heard about this from them. You've heard about this, when you talk to people around the league. He's a great kid who loves, breathes basketball, is going to work really hard. So maybe they also view that as an upside swing. This guy's going to get everything he has out of himself.
Yeah, which can't go underrated. I mean, I think we know that that's extremely important to Sean Marks and this Nets front office.
Oh, yeah.
It's something they've prioritized. And I heard throughout the pre-draft, I talked to Egor at the Combine. He seemed extremely well-read, extremely a very good kid there. I talked to some people at the Combine and asked them about it. And they were like, oh yeah, he crushed it in his interviews. All the teams that have spoken to him, love what he had to say. They love his disposition. They think he's a hard worker. He's a team first guy, all that stuff. And I think that's obviously reflected in the way that he plays the game. So that goes without saying. But, we talked about the upside, just now, you touched on it. I touched on it. And now just talking about the floor, because there is a there's a very real possibility that 3-point shot doesn't come along. I think he shot 69.7% from the free throw line this year. I think the shot mechanics aren't bad, but you just never know. If that 3-point shot doesn't come along, then you have this guy who is a very talented passer, but doesn't have necessarily a great handle, can't create advantages on his own. Don't know if he's going to be able to play through contact if he is able to get downhill because he's got a pretty slight frame. And then where is he then? Because he's not going to be a lead ball handler if he can't shoot at all. You can't really play him off the ball either too well. It's what is the floor there? That's kind of my worry with this.
He's in Europe. He's in Europe. He's out of the league.
Yeah, and that's for a guy that you take with the number 8 pick and your first lottery selection since 2010, how much anticipation was there for this pick amongst the Nets fan base? We've literally since that Mikal Bridges trade got made and the Nets reacquired these picks from the Houston Rockets, it's been a full year just thinking about this one moment. And now it's a guy who, does that almost make you feel better about it? Because this is the kind of pick that maybe Sean Marks just had. You're
no, it does not. Actually, none of what you just said makes me feel
this is all making me feel worse about it.
It makes me feel a lot worse, but go on.
But Sean Marks, maybe Sean Marks just has infinite job security, but this is the kind of pick, if he completely whiffs on this pick, and it's a pick that a lot of people consider a reach, and he whiffs on it, this is a kind of pick that can get someone fired. So that he must have a lot of conviction in this guy in order to take him in this spot, or Jordi Fernandez has a lot of conviction in him. Or
was
both.
This the most important day in Nets history since Game 7 against the Bucks? Singular day.
Oh yeah, for sure, without a doubt. I mean, I wrote an article about it last week. I did a podcast episode about it, also just outlining the Nets draft history and why these two drafts are the most important in Nets draft history. I forgot what the exact number was, but it was something like the Nets had made, I think it was 28 or 30 something lottery selections in their franchise's history. And out of those guys, they've all combined for 7 All-Star appearances with the Nets. So that's like pretty abysmal right there. Like we all know, like they've never had a homegrown star player ever in the franchise's history. And that's why everybody was so juiced for this draft. And there was so much anticipation for this pick. So like, yeah, I mean, I guess my thought process with it is, for them to go out on a limb and draft this guy, some people would say it's a reach, but there was so much anticipation for this pick that I just feel like Sean has to have a decent amount of conviction in this guy, that he's going to be able to get a lot, and they must really like what they see, because like, it's just, there is some bust potential here. So I just think
did you see the war room? They went crazy. They were like surprised that Egor was available.
It's funny because all right. So Lucas and I, for all of you, like we're watching the broadcast. We're in the workroom in Barclays Center, and we didn't know what the pick was yet. No. And the war room on the broadcast, nuts. The pick's in, and they're all going nuts. So we're like, okay, it's probably Maluach, because that was the guy that conceivably fell, and they got who they maybe didn't expect to be able to get. So they're like, in that situation, if you get a guy that you thought you weren't going to get, you're like freaking out. So we're like, oh, it's probably Maluach, because they're so happy about it. And then it's Demin, and it's like, shouldn't you have known that you were going to get Demin there? Like, did you really think anybody was going to take him ahead of 8? So that was confusing about it.
The optics of just the entire NBA being shocked and going crazy kind of at the Nets draft throughout the night, with consistent ESPN cuts to just the most jubilant war room you've ever seen, was very funny. And I hope that you can show this clip to me in 5 years when Egor's on the all NBA team and I can look like a fool. But man, that was shocking. And it will be hard for anybody to make the case to me that he was one of the 10 best prospects, 15 even best prospects in this class. As I told you, he's going to have the lowest true shooting of any NCAA prospect selected in the first round against top 150 competition. He's going to have the lowest box plus minus. I mean, he just wasn't that productive at BYU.
I'll say, I don't think he had a great supporting cast there at BYU necessarily. I mean, I watched them play against Alabama in the Sweet 16. I went to that game at Prudential Center, and I was not at all impressed with the guys that they had around him, at least from an offensive standpoint. Yeah. And that made some of his assist numbers more impressive to me, because like there wasn't like some of the guys who were playing there were just like, I was like, that guy should not be playing on a good, like, high level D1 team.
And they were better with him on the court, to be fair. Like, in fact, as many turnovers as he had, their overall turnover percentage was down with him on the court, because he absorbed so much ball handling responsibility. He created more shots at the rim when he was on the court than they had when they were off the court. So I do have to give him that. And hey man, he's gonna love Brighton Beach. He's already talked about going to eat at some Russian restaurants. And a great quote. And a cool kid, and in a vacuum, it's cool that he's a net. That number 8 is a bit wild.
Definitely a bit wild, but I think that we'll see. I mean, at the end of the day, like, the draft's often a crapshoot. We don't know, and I think I gave the case early on for how you could at least like talk yourself into it. And the Nets have really put a lot into the scouting process. Like, we've seen. They got these picks back. I said the anticipation of this pick, like, they've been preparing for this for like a full year. Just they're doing the scout series. They have all these resources going into it. They've gone, through every angle you could, perceivably go through about these guys. And they came out and they felt that Egor was their guy. So we'll see. But they also made 4 other first-round picks, some of which were also surprising. And there was a constant theme among a lot of them. So going to take a quick break, and then we'll round out this episode talking about the Nets' remaining first-round picks. But first, want to tell you about our friends over at SKIMS. When I found out SKIMS was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try. Let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear, fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for me. SKIMS changed all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried SKIMS 5-inch boxer brief, and I'm hooked. These are perfect for my active lifestyle. They move with me, never lose their shape, and stay in place all day. Whether I'm working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I've ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're not wearing anything at all. Shop SKIMS Mens at skims.com. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select Locked On Nets in the drop-down menu that follows. All right, rest of the Nets first-round picks. There were 5 of them, NBA record. We hit on Demin at 8, obviously the big one. Then they take Nolan Traore at 19. They take Drake Powell at 22. They take Ben Suraf at 26. And they take I'm like half asleep here. And then they take, who's at 27?
Wolf.
Danny Wolf at 27. Of those guys, which would you say you like the most? And then we'll get into maybe which you like the least.
Powell. I think there are a lot of reasons to buy the shot, and he might be one of the most athletic guys in the class. Sean Marks on the post draft Zoom called him perhaps the most athletic guy in the class. So right there, you see upside. Brooklyn might be a bad fit for him at the moment because they don't have a lot of advantage creators that he can play off of, but in a vacuum, decent pick. Wolf at 27, there are people that were like, I would rather have him over Queen as weirdly skilled, weird as a compliment, this crazy array of skills as a big guy that may struggle to defend. And Queen, was 14 spots higher than him. Those are the guys I can get behind. And I mean, in a vacuum, Suraf is 6'7" with a tough handle. I think that's not a reach, but it's more so the accumulation of guys that was a bit surprising. But if you're just asking me for one favorite pick, and Traore, ain't no problem with that at 19. In a vacuum, I like Powell at 22.
Yeah, I think Powell is definitely the safest pick. It's like the Nets made all of these other picks that seemed like somewhat swings, and they were like, we need to get at least one guy who we feel like has like a safe, maybe higher floor, like projectable skill set. And you look at Powell, he's like super athletic, doesn't really do much offensively outside of shoot. Like he's not a guy who's putting the ball on the floor and doing a lot of that stuff, but shot it well, was close to like 38% from 3, somewhat low volume, but can shoot, super athletic. They might think there's some other things they can unlock about his game. So Drake Powell, like not the flashiest pick, but that's a guy I think there's a clear runway and a clear like archetype of what he can be in the NBA. Talking about the other guys, I mean, we talked about Egor Demin, very talented point guard, has, a lot of playmaking, a lot of different skills, like things he can do on the ball, struggles shooting. Nolan Traore, another guy, really talented on the ball in a little bit of a different way than Demin, has like a pretty lightning quick first step, can turn the corner pretty much just about, just as good as anybody in the draft, has some of those offensive skills, can pass, there's some turnover struggles and things like that, struggles shooting the 3. Ben Suraf, guy, talented ball handler, doesn't really seem like there's a pass that the guy can't make, struggles shooting the 3. So we got 3 ball handlers who all have somewhat different things, but all can do things on the ball that they're really talented with, but they all struggle shooting the 3. So maybe the philosophy with Sean Marks and Jordi Fernandez was like, we'll get 3 ball handlers who are all like very talented, somewhat different ways, but all have like a lot of things that they can do. And maybe we'll just hope that like one of them can hit 3 somewhere down the line.
Throw some darts.
Like, I'm somewhat joking, but like not really.
No, I mean the probability that one of them turns into a good shooter got to be decent, right?
Yeah, like that's part of the reason maybe why they made all 5 picks. Like anytime you make 5 picks in the first round, it's never happened. But like any quantity of first round picks over 2, you're throwing darts at a board, as you said. You're hoping that one of them hits. And in this case, it seems like they identified some traits that they liked in ball handlers. They liked high IQ, high feel, unselfish guys who could pass and do some different things. I think Suraf and Demin a little bit more similar in that way. And I think Traore has a little bit more like athletic, like quickness and on-ball juice. But they got all those guys who I think fit that like unselfish, like ball handler, point guard mold. And yeah, like they're hoping maybe like one of them can develop the outside shot, and then they can develop like some other parts of their bag and some other ways that they can score the basketball. So is that a terrible process? I don't think so. I mean, not necessarily.
Let me give you a stat that Jerry Engelman tweeted, who is the creator of ESPN's Real Plus Minus. There were 3 prospects in this class that averaged at least 6 assists per 36 minutes. They all went to the Nets. That does not include Danny Wolf, who had in what he says, the second highest ever NCAA assist rate for a guy listed at 7 feet. I think they had a clear philosophy in a heavy ball screen DHO offense under Jordy Fernandez that really, really emphasized side to side, delay actions, dribble handoffs, pick and rolls. We're getting guys that want to get into the lane and pass the rock. And so a lot of people thought, oh, maybe we need the big, to initiate that, to be, he went, it seems like this new direction of the Nets under Jordy Fernandez, whether it was his opinion or whether it was Sean Marks being influenced, by the way the team played this year or whatever, this new direction of the Nets had a lot of input on the way they went in the draft. And so they, as someone said, perhaps watched the Pacers make a finals run by playing high field basketball, moving the ball around, and OD'd on that sentiment. I hope they didn't OD, but it certainly feels that way right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't say I hate the process. Like getting a bunch of unselfish guys, like we've all, a lot of people. It's also funny because, when you look at like to bring it back to Egor Demin, you look at the way the board shook out. A lot of people wanted Ace Bailey, probably a lot of Nets fans. A lot of people wanted Jeremiah Fears. A lot of people probably would have been happy with Trey Johnson, but then those guys were all off the board. And I tweeted out like Kaman Maluach, top prospect left on the board. And immediately I already knew the sentiment before it, but then a lot of people were like, ugh, like so boring, like Maluach, like we don't want a center, we want a ball handler. And it's like at that point, once those other guys were off the court, like what were like Yakachonis, was that the other ball handler that you wanted? Like it's right. If you're like, that's why when I talked about this with Derek Parker, who's a good draft analyst, and we did an episode about this, and I was talking about who are like the conceivable upside swings who could be available for the Nets at 8. And Egor Demin was one of the guys. Like he was at the back of it. But we talked about, Fears. We talked about I think Trey Johnson. We talked about Yakachonis. We talked about Asenge. And Demin was in that group. So like if you're looking for upside, if you're looking for ball handlers, right, like Kaman Maluach was the other guy that was available. If you're a Nets fan who wanted a ball handler and you thought Maluach was boring, you got Demin. Like, and then Yakachonis slipped to 20. So, they seemed like, we just outlined everything they seemed like they were going after. High feel, high character, team first, guys who can pass, guys who have other like scalable traits. I think that all those guys have that in some regard. Whether it's Demin with his size, 6'8", 6'10" wingspan, Traore with his speed, the way that he can self-create a little bit. I think maybe that could help him defensively, some of that athleticism. Saraf, some of the passing and the other stuff that he can do. So, they took a swing on a few different ball handlers. They got one wing prospect in Powell, who I think they think, should have somewhat of a floor. And then the last guy is Danny Wolf. And we'll talk a little bit about Danny Wolf, and then we'll round it out. And, I wrote about Wolf earlier today because he told me he worked out for Brooklyn. And I thought that he was a possibility for the Nets, given Jordy Fernandez's history. And some of the things that he said about being interested in having a hub big man. And he's a guy that, a lot of people really liked him. I think he was one of the more polarizing guys in the draft. And a lot of people thought that maybe he could be in like the mid-teens, even the late lottery. And then he falls all the way to the Nets at 27. And at this point, at 27, I think it'd be kind of tough to be mad at this pick. Do you agree?
Right. At 27, for sure. Before Egor set the tone for the whole night. And he didn't really have to. If they take Colin Murray-Boyles or Maluach at Queen, the narrative around their night is just entirely different. But it's Traore and Saraf on top of the big swing. Because the big swing, the most important one, was at 8. And then they got guys that maybe don't fit with him. that set the tone for everything. In terms of Wolf, it's an absolutely fine bet at number 27 to go get the 7-footer who has uncommon hand-eye coordination, who, again, we know the Nets index, shooting workouts. There was somebody today who said like he shot the ball incredibly well in workouts, and showed real like stretch 5. He could play the 4. If he's really spacing the floor, you could put him next to another big guy. You could put him next to Nick Claxton or Day'Ron Sharpe, who the Nets have right now. Divorcing it from the rest of their draft, I kind of like the Wolf pick. And apparently, Sean Marks, which raised eyebrows in the Zoom press conference, at least for me, said a few of these guys thought they were going to go higher. And then Danny Wolf gets on the podium and said, yeah, I thought I was going higher. So,
yeah, he was crying at the table right before the Nets picked him. He wasn't crying because he got picked from the Nets. He didn't know yet. He was crying because he fell to 27. And I think that he was one of the last green room prospects there, and he was upset about it. So, if you look compared to like consensus big boards, I don't think a lot of people thought that these guys were going to go higher than where they did, but some of them must have thought that. But yeah, talking about Wolf, he's definitely going to be a fun guy to watch. Like if we're talking about what the Nets are going to be next year, like he'll definitely be fun. He's a guy 6'11", can handle the ball, like played almost point guard for a lot of the time at Michigan. I think the shooting will, be a big thing for him at the next level, because in order for him to be, like there's not a lot of backup big men who you're going to, maybe he could be a starter. Maybe I shouldn't pigeonhole him in to be a backup, but there isn't a lot of, backup big men who are going to come in and just get the ball and just cook all the time. Like it's not really an archetype you see so much of, and he's not a rim protector defensively, obviously. So if he can space the floor, I think that would help a lot. He's got a good shooting motion. Like I think that's definitely a possibility.
It's hard. That's all true. And I love the high feel in terms of like wanting to pass as a response to these NBA playoffs. But aside from Powell, and I suppose Traore to an extent as a smaller guard, it's hard to watch the NBA right now and and index so many guys that will have trouble playing like with physical force. We saw the Thunder, and really what changed the Pacers season, and really a lot of the Nuggets around Jokic, like guys that play with strength in a lot of different areas of the court. And it's tough to say the Nets really walked away with a lot of that in this draft, despite them going for, I think a very clear direction with a lot of their prospects.
It's been feel like it's been a criticism of the Sean Marks regime is they like a lot of these finesse guys. Look at the first pick they made in this draft. Egor Demin might be the definition of finesse. Like, you talk to him in the interview and he says, basketball is like art and I want to play beautifully and all that. And like, not to like say anything wrong with that. It was awesome. I loved it. I thought it was a great quote. But like, if you're talking about like guys who, are just going to go into someone's chest, that's definitely not something that Egor Demin was known for. Driving to the basket, I think he was a guy that avoided contact a lot more. So yeah, like from that regard, that's tough. Running out of time here, I think one other thing that I wanted to touch on, if you're looking for a silver lining for this draft, and it might not be the silver lining that Nets fans were hoping for, but the Nets are going to suck next year.
Are you going to? I was wondering if you were going to go there.
The Nets are going to be terrible next year.
Terrible.
And that, I feel like that's what a lot of people, obviously we're not going to get into a little tank versus not tank debate, but there's definitely a group of people who wanted that. And if they got
one pick next year and it's theirs.
Yeah. They could get more, but if you're looking at this group, a silver lining, there's 3 guys. Like, I think it's fair to say that they didn't execute the tank. They didn't optimize the tank this year. I don't think there's any debate about that. They're the 6th best odds. That limits your floor. Obviously your floor isn't, 4, 5, 6, it's 8 or it's whatever it is. They fell to 8. So now next year, they might be like one of the worst teams in the league legitimately. And if they're one of the worst teams in the league legitimately, they'll have a really good chance. We've seen nothing's guaranteed, but if you have the worst record, your floor is 5, second worst at 6, like they'll have a really good shot at potentially falling in the top 3 of a draft that there's 3 like really highly regarded prospects. I know we don't want to go like fans might not want me to hear me talk about next draft already.
Listen,
but
we just did a year. What's another year?
I mean, look at like, I mean, I feel like you have to agree with me, right? Like they're going to stink next year.
For sure.
And you look at,
they're gonna stink. And they haven't even traded anybody yet, and they might. They haven't even traded any veterans.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if like Egor Demin's a bust, like that'll be really tough. But we'll see. Like we're gonna need a few years before we could even see what he is. But if we get to this point next year and Egor Demin, the jury's still out, but they got Egor Demin next to AJ DeBansta or Darren Peterson, that I feel like that would quell the concerns of the fan base a little bit.
And it kind of goes back to my point about the whole draft came down to Egor. That set the tone for the whole night. It's about the biggest swing you take, and about the top blue chip talent that they need. So that is a positive. They're in a position to get it next year, and they certainly know that. Pretty shocking. Shocking
and last thing I want to leave you with, like we just talked about all these picks that they made and the consistent theme, and Jordy Fernandez probably playing a large role in it, of all these guys being, a lot of pass first guy, a lot of high feel guys, a lot of unselfish guys, that clearly being the way that they want to play in the direction they're going. What does that mean for Cam Thomas?
Going to get a lot of shot opportunities next year. Sort of might be the Cam Thomas, Ben Simmons backcourt on steroids.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm going to have so much more draft content on here. Yeah. We're pushing like 3 a.m. I think both of us are probably getting a little loopy, but Lucas, definitely have you back on to kind of maybe take some deeper dives individually into what these guys do. But
for sure,
definitely an interesting night to say the least. And I think we'll leave it at that. So appreciate you taking the time, man. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Lucas and our reaction to what just was a crazy and a historic Brooklyn Nets draft. If you don't already, make sure to subscribe to this show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy this content, hit the like button, leave a comment. Only takes a second. Really helps me to build this channel. Anything you can do to engage there is much appreciated. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.